to the experiences of the 1.1 million victims and survivors in Bangladesh refugee camps who had to flee during the genocidal campaign in 2017, and the daily experiences of the remaining 600,000 Rohingya in Myanmar. These survivors and victims witnessed the most horrific experiences, including the killing of their family members, throwing children into fire, raped thousands of women, including in front of them in most cases, and forcing them to flee their home after torching hundreds of villages. Each and every one of us is a testament to the genocide that we continue to endure every day. For decades, the Burmese military has used these brutal and divide and rule tactics of persecutions against the ethnic and religious minorities across the country. Today, the coup in Myanmar is the result of the whole failure to hold the perpetrators of these atrocity crimes, the military, accountable. Since February, the same military has been using similar tactics against all the people in Myanmar and killed over 900 people, including children and elderly, and detained over 6,000 and forced thousands more to flee from their homes. To end this human suffering, we must first recognize the problem as it is and then work on addressing root causes. For years, many civil society organizations, including my organization, Women's Peace Network, have advocated to the world about the decade-long mass atrocity crimes in Burma. But the world has not listened to us. The international community now must recognize these crimes as it is. Now is the time for the US Secretary of the State to recognize the Rohingya genocide before its 4th anniversary next month. Second, we must take concrete actions to hold violations of religious freedom accountable. I urge the US government to use the international justice mechanisms to end the military leaders' impunity, and to the US Congress to pass Burma Human Rights and Freedom Act, Burma Act at House, and the Rohingya Genocide Act immediately. Ending the military's impunity will not only help the survivors of Rohingya genocide and other civilians of Burma, but also will send a signal to other regimes around the world that their actions have consequences. Third, we must implement measures to protect the religious and ethnic minorities. We must see that the protections of the minorities and religious freedoms are connected, and that the ethnic and religious minorities are targeted in many parts of the world. History has shown repeatedly that the people in power, especially in authoritarian regimes, use their religions as the tools to sustain their power. With the global rise in authoritarianism, including in Burma, it is now more important than ever to uplift the religious minorities and act on protecting religious freedom. Finally, as a member of the persecuted minority, I believe that no one should feel to be born as a crime or persecuted based on their identity. People like us from the affected community have been doing everything within our capacity day and night for justice and freedom. It is up to those who are in power now to act. The world cannot fail us again. Thank you very much.
Welcome back, Summit Co-Chair Katrina Lantos Sweat.
Boy, after you listen to these incredible, powerful testimonies from YY, from Tursane earlier, I think we are all convinced of two things. First, we are most definitely on the side of the angels. And when I think about these women, their courage, their bravery, their voices, and when I think about so many of you out there in the audience who I know of the extraordinary work you are doing, I think that not only are we on the side of the angels, but we may have some angels amongst us. So thank you to all of you. So next, it is my privilege to introduce a wonderful speaker, a person who has had a tremendous impact in terms of bringing the power and passion of faith communities into collaborative partnership with government and civil society. While we rightly celebrate the wisdom of the Founding Fathers in codifying the separation of church and state, it is important to recognize that separation of these two entities does not preclude their collaboration. Indeed, one can argue that such collaboration both strengthens and enriches societies. Melissa Rogers' distinguished career as a lawyer, an academic, and civil servant has focused on the vital intersection between church and state. From 2013 to 2017, Melissa Rogers served as Executive Director of the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships in the Obama administration. Now, I would venture to say that the surest sign that you've done a superb job is being asked to come back and do it a second time, which is precisely what President Biden asked Melissa to do earlier this year. In addition to returning to her previous role, she also serves as Senior Director for Faith and Public Policy in the White House Domestic Policy Council. We should all feel a great sense of confidence knowing that a person of Melissa's caliber and experience is shaping and guiding the Biden administration's efforts to ensure that faith communities are empowered to come together in cross-faith partnerships and to take an active role in our nation's civic and cultural life, a right that should be afforded to faith communities in every part of the world. We are so fortunate to have Melissa Rogers here with us today, and I'm delighted to turn the time over to her. Thank you.
Good morning. It's great to be with all of you. And thanks, Katrina, for that very kind introduction and for your leadership on these issues, including through this wonderful conference. I'd also like to thank Ambassadors Brownback and Saperstein for their distinguished teamwork on international religious freedom, including through this conference. Their collaboration across party lines is a great reminder that we can find common ground amid our differences and work together to change people's lives for the better. Thanks as well to all of you gathered here today, both virtually and in person. It's inspiring to be among so many leaders dedicated to the freedom of religion and belief for everyone, everywhere. I'm pleased and honored this morning to bring you warm greetings from President Biden. As the President has said, ensuring freedom of religion is as important now as it has ever been. This right, as you know, is enshrined in the First Amendment to our Constitution and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As you know, that declaration states that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes a person's freedom to change religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. President Biden, a person of deep faith, certainly understands the importance of religious belief and practices in the lives of so many. The President has said, and I quote, "The work of protecting religious freedom for people in all faiths and none is never finished. We must be vigilant against the rising tide of targeted violence and hate at home and abroad, and work to ensure that no one feels afraid to attend a religious service, school, or community center, or walk down the street wearing the symbols of their faith. My administration, President Biden says, will guard these cherished principles. The United States promotes religious freedom as a key part of a larger agenda to protect human rights. In addition to the State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom, which I'll refer to as the IRF office, the department also has, for example, a Bureau of Democracy, Rights and Labor, a Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration, an Office of Global Women's Issues, a special envoy to advance the human rights of LGBTQI+ persons, an Office of Global Criminal Justice, and an Office to monitor and combat trafficking in persons. These offices and advisors work together and are dedicated to promoting the equal value and the infinite worth of every human being. These precious rights are interdependent. A congregation that is predominantly comprised of members of a minority race or ethnicity, for example, can't gather for worship and carry out its ministries unless it is free from both religious and racial or ethnic discrimination. And the many LGBTQ individuals who are also persons of faith cannot practice their faith freely when they are subject to laws criminalizing them for who they are. As Secretary Blinken has said, religious freedom can't be fully realized unless other human rights are respected. And when governments violate their people's right to believe and worship freely, it jeopardizes all the others. This morning, I'd like to highlight briefly a few steps the Biden-Harris administration is taking to protect and advance religious freedom for all. Let me begin with our moral obligation to protect refugees. As you know, the number of refugees and other displaced persons has reached an alarming and historic high, more than 82 million people worldwide. In response, President Biden has raised our annual refugee admissions cap to 62,500 for this fiscal year, and he plans to raise it to 125,000 next year. He has also ensured that our refugee admissions program is able to serve refugees from around the world by reestablishing regional allocations and eliminating restrictive allocation categories. Of course, governments cannot do this work alone. I run the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, as was mentioned earlier, and we work in partnership with communities of faith and conscience to welcome refugees and to advocate for their rights in all of their home countries. And we continue to be very grateful for these partnerships. The U.S. is committed to upholding its long tradition as a leader in refugee resettlement that provides a beacon of hope for persecuted people around the globe, promotes stability in regions experiencing crisis, and facilitates international collaboration to address the global refugee crisis. Also on his first day in office, President Biden revoked orders and proclamations preventing certain individuals from entering the United States, first from primarily Muslim countries and later from largely African countries. These actions were a stain on our national conscience and inconsistent with our long history of welcoming people of all faiths and no faith at all. As President Biden said at the time, make no mistake, where there are threats to our nation, we will address them. But we will not turn our back on our values with discriminatory bans on entry into the United States. The Biden-Harris administration advocates for universal respect for religious freedom in many other ways as well. Here are a few additional snapshots. First, in January, Secretary Blinken affirmed that the People's Republic of China is committing genocide and crimes against humanity against Uyghurs and other ethnic and religious minorities in Xinjiang. In March, Canada, the European Union, the UK, and the US took coordinated action to impose sanctions on PRC officials for these human rights abuses. And at the recent G7 summit, the world's leading democracies stood united for religious freedom and against forced labor, including in Xinjiang, and committed to ensuring that global supply chains are free from the use of such labor. Our administration has translated these commitments into a series of actions imposing import and export restrictions on PRC companies for their use of forced labor from Xinjiang. In recent months, the State Department has advocated for the rights of countless individuals in China who've been subject to a widespread crackdown by the authorities against religious and ethnic minorities, including Tibetans, Falun Gong adherents, Christians, and Uyghur Muslims. We will continue to use all appropriate tools to promote accountability for those responsible for human rights and religious freedom violations and abuses in China and elsewhere. Second snapshot. Through engagement with governments in regions across 3 administrations, the State Department, including its IRF office, has advanced progress on religious freedom in Central Asia. Uzbekistan's recent positive actions, which include releasing political prisoners and revising its laws, have been well documented. Tajikistan is now set to receive the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion and Belief for the first time, and recently announced plans to adopt a human rights action plan. Turkmenistan released 16 Jehovah's Witnesses conscientious objectors from prison in May, and we hope to see further reforms. Another snapshot. The U.S. has taken strong stands in support of democracy and human rights in Burma. As the Burmese military accelerated violence against civilians in the wake of the February coup, the administration provided emergency support for members of various ethnic and religious minority groups at a time when many found themselves in the military crosshairs for actions as simple as praying for peace. In 2020, the State Department again designated Burma as a country of particular concern for severe violations of religious freedom. Another snapshot. In June, the IRF office worked with our missions abroad to track the disturbing global uptick in both anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim incidents and sentiment related to the Israel-Palestine conflict, including a surge in online hate speech and tropes, vandalism of temples and mosques, and harassment and physical assaults. Also, the IRF office has maintained international momentum and enthusiasm for the ministerial to advance religious freedom. We look forward to participating in what we hope will be the first post-pandemic in-person ministerial to be hosted by the United Kingdom in London next summer. We'll look forward to seeing many of you there. And the final snapshot I want to provide is that the IRF office has, as a co-founder and an active participant in the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance, has been continuing their investment in this very important group that I know so many of you are active in. So thank you for your work there. The IRF office, even during the pandemic, has been meeting monthly with envoys representing like-minded governments to share information and coordinate religious freedom advocacy. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, this group has played crucial roles. Alliance members have advocated for governments to release all prisoners held on account of faith or belief. They called upon governments and religious leaders to avoid language that scapegoats certain religious and belief communities. They've also urged all governments to take proactive steps to ensure that individuals in minority and religious belief communities are safe, protected, and receive health services in an equitable and non-discriminatory manner. And we've been pleased to take note that hundreds of prisoners of conscience have been released during this period of time, and governments have condemned incidents of discrimination and violence against members of vulnerable communities, showing the enduring power of this alliance, and we look forward to working closely and actively with the members of this alliance moving forward. President Biden looks forward to nominating a highly qualified ambassador at large for international religious freedom. He looks forward to doing so in the coming weeks to carry forward these and related efforts. As important as the work of governments is, Eleanor Roosevelt was correct when she said that the destiny of human rights is in the hands of all our citizens and all our communities. The United States government deeply values the role of civil society in advancing international religious freedom and human rights more broadly. Your work is vital to informing our engagement and advocacy And you also hold us accountable for our efforts to promote the values in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You know, listening to the speakers today, and I know we've had a great day yesterday as well, it's plain there is so much common ground on international religious freedom issues. It's inspiring, it's encouraging. There is so much good we can do together to alleviate suffering around the world, to recognize the dignity of all, and to restore hope. This is an exciting opportunity for us to work together, and President Biden and his administration looks forward to working with you to do this important work. We offer our thanks and our best wishes for you at this conference as you do this work here, and we look forward to collaborating with you in the days ahead. Thank you so much for the time to be with you today.
Welcome to the stage, Director of the Religious Freedom Center, Hudson Institute, Nina Shea.
What an inspiration this conference is. Good morning. We're now going to tackle the critical and enormous issue of refugee protection. The UNHCR reports that there are over 82 million forcibly displaced persons worldwide. Many of these displaced are from situations of conflict, insecurity, and persecution in which particular religious and ethno-religious communities are targeted with atrocities. These groups are among those most vulnerable. Even in their places of displacement, often they are marginalized, severely discriminated against, and either further victimized. In Iraq, for many years after ISIS attacked the Yazidi and Christian communities of Nineveh, UN aid failed to reach these victims. Faith-based groups, especially local faith-based groups, stepped in and showed that they can play an indispensable role in helping to identify the needs and distributing the aid. With us to discuss these issues and policy solutions are three distinguished experts. It's my honor to introduce them. Rita Stephan, USAID Regional Coordinator for Religious and Ethnic Minorities for the Middle East. Anurima Bhargava, Commissioner of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and its immediate prior chair. His Excellency, Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka of Sokoto, Nigeria. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Bishop Kuka, welcome to America, welcome to Washington and to this summit. I'm going to start with you. The Nigerian Catholic Bishops' Conference, whom you are representing at this summit, has stated that Nigeria is falling apart. Despite having Africa's largest economy, there is little doubt that a state of lawlessness has taken over vast areas of the country. Please tell us a little bit about this situation and how it happened and how that affects your community, Christian community.
Well, thank you very much once again, and I really want to thank the organizers of this spectacular event. Let me say that what the bishops of Nigeria, the Catholic Bishops' Conference said merely resonated the sentiments across Nigeria, and you really don't even have to be living in Nigeria to know the existential threat to our common humanity and unity that has been our lot in the last few years. The good news is that Nigeria has had, for the first time in its history, 5 back-to-back elections, thus showing very clearly that Nigerians themselves have decided to embrace democracy. Unfortunately for us, in the last 6 years or so of the Buhari administration, we had hoped, that this government will be able to build on some of the opportunities. And I can say, for example, that the chairman of the party on which the president rode to power is a communion-receiving Catholic. The director of his campaign was also a communion-receiving Catholic. These are people that I know pretty well. So right across the board, there was massive support for this, for the administration. And we had hoped that given the president's antecedents, it would be possible for him to build and deal very quickly with issues of national cohesion, fighting corruption, and then unifying the country. Unfortunately, the policies of government focusing on nepotism, obviously and very clearly favoring Muslims by way of the appointments, suddenly led us to where we are now, which is that you have a whole culture of cynicism, which even ordinary people in northern Nigeria who are Muslim more of them have died in this, in the last few years than even Christians. So what we're dealing with is an existential threat to the unity of the country itself. The Bishops' Conference, of course, we market hope, so we continue to look on the bright side and encourage our people to look a bit more closely about the opportunities that, that we still have. And so this is really where we are now.
Okay, thank you. Rita, tell us how USAID is able to work to alleviate the burden of displacement in the Middle East, and any lessons that you may be able to point out for the Nigeria situation, which is also suffering from huge numbers of displacement.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Nina, and thank you, dear panelists, for this opportunity. I want to say when ISIS took over Iraq, it was really unprecedented, and it was a situation that used indiscriminate violence. And while no one could have accounted for that, our response was very swift and comprehensive, working with allies in the US government and international allies. USAID assistance came to the refugees in Iraq and the internally displaced individuals with humanitarian assistance right away. Then we were able to provide cash assistance, food supplies, and cash for work opportunities. Just recently, my account in the last 2 years, for up to 50,000 people. Now, the amount that we've spent in Iraq since ISIS is on the religious and ethnic minorities has been about over $500 million. And beyond humanitarian assistance, we provided an infrastructure rehabilitation, preventive and mental health services, but we also provided economic opportunities and development assistance. Again, just in the last 2 years, we were able to support 6,000 female-headed households and 4,000 small businesses get back on their feet, and these are all minority businesses. We continue to work on peace building and to prevent future conflicts and support the return of a displaced population in the Nineveh Plains and Western Nineveh, and most of whom are religious minorities, of course. And I'm proud to say that even during COVID, we were able to achieve a peace agreement in the Tel Afar Covenant agreement between Sunni and Shia and the Turkmen. So our work continue, and absolutely there's so much to do in the aftermath of atrocities.
Commissioner, tell us about USCIRF's work to help religious minorities, or recommendations that you have made to the Biden administration to help.
Thank you, and it's really a pleasure to be here with past commissioners and a number of our present commissioners and staff of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. We were created in 1998 through the International Religious Freedom Act, and one of the things that IRFA has really guided us to do is to have a very rich history of advocating on behalf of those refugees who are fleeing religious persecution around the world. We recently had a hearing that was on refugees fleeing religious persecution and made recommendations to the Biden administration on how the U.S. government can better support refugees and asylum seekers. We have been encouraged by recent efforts by the administration to open America's doors to more refugees, including those fleeing religious persecution. As many of you know, President Biden signed a presidential determination in April to revise and reallocate the countries and regions from which the United States would accept refugees in the current fiscal year and up the number to 62,500 and then up the number in subsequent years to 125,000 plus. And as IRFA sort of advocates and provides for, religious persecution should be taken into account when we're looking at what the refugee ceiling is. And that's something that we have continued to urge the Biden administration to do. I think it's important. It was unfortunate at best that in prior years, some of the places in the world that we have seen some of the worst religious persecution were places where the United States closed its doors. And that we're seeing those doors open up again. So one of the things that we want to advocate for is not only for refugees around the world, but for the continued implementation of the Lautenberg Amendment, which is an amendment and a special program for ensuring that certain persecuted religious groups from Iran can seek refugee status in the United States. There are currently 80 Iranians remaining in Austria who have been waiting to come to the United States. That is a small part of obviously refugees around the world who have been waiting as well. And so we also have spent a lot of time looking at the expedited removal process, which is whether or not the treatment of those who have come to our borders seeking asylum comports with the United States obligations to support refugees. And we've issued reports, a number of reports on expedited removal. Most of the flaws that we've seen in the expedited removal process are ones that linger and continue. And so we really urge the Biden administration to make sure that there's not an erroneous return of asylum seekers to countries where they could continue to face persecution and torture, and something that could be exacerbated, and certainly was exacerbated when expedited removal was at the levels it has been in recent years. So we're excited to know that there's going to be approval, executive order really asking for there to be a review of the expedited removal process, and it's one where we want to make sure those who are fleeing religious persecution are part of that conversation and the ways in which that process is improved.
Thank you. Back to you, Bishop. Nigeria has about 2 million displaced persons from mainly in the northeast area from Boko Haram and other terror groups. So 2 weeks ago, the Nigerian press ran an article reporting that IDPs, the internally displaced, were forced to live along with the de-radicalized former Boko Haram militants in government camps in Borno, even though the conflict is still ongoing, and still suffering from the trauma of the massacre of their husbands and brothers, maybe their own rapes, the burning of their villages. They had to face their tormentors every day. They have to face them. Some weren't de-radicalized and rejoined Boko Haram even. How can the churches and other faith-based groups help the situation?
Well, thank you very much. I think perhaps some of your data may be based on, maybe a bit old, in part because after the Northeast, in the last 3 years or so, the violence has spread across to North Central, to Northwestern Nigeria, and to Southern Nigeria. So obviously the refugee figures or IDP figures are much higher than that. But for us as church, I think it's important to underscore the fact that we were there even before the modern state emerged. And we've been there with the people, whether it's education, whether it's health services. These are signature tools of the Catholic Church. I can speak for the Catholic Church rather authoritatively. And to say that, and I think this is why I'm very happy that you say this here, we need a seat at the table if we are really going to reach our people. Those giving out the money from government to workers know that a lot of the money going to developing countries, especially post-conflict countries, are largely stolen, and they never reach the people. And I think what is most critical for us now is to begin to think about tomorrow. There's very little we can do about the past, but I think we can shape tomorrow. And in my view, there are 3 quick points I'd like to make. The first, for example, is if we're looking at how Boko Haram has destroyed the foundations of our society, we must also accept that educating a new group of young people is important for shaping the future. Right now, there are a total of about 15, 16 million young Nigerians who are moving around the streets and not in school. The abduction of school children has not only created a completely different sense of what education is for children, it has also made it very difficult even for those who are not in school to think very clearly that perhaps Boko Haram must be celebrating. So I make the point that perhaps even if by way of scholarships and so on, we need education. For me is the most fundamental tool for integration. And I live in Sokoto, and the Christian population in Sokoto is barely 2%. Sokoto is the Vatican of the Muslim community. We are running, even with the little resources we have, we're running the best schools. So if we can get the kind of support that can enable us to begin to train a new generation of Nigerians by equipping them with education, then we will be able to close, the tragic gap of religious persecution, the feeling that we are not citizens, but we are Christians and we are Muslims, because we're all dying together. So I think that there is need for us to have a seat at the table so that this conversation can be in such a way that helps to, guarantee a very stable Nigeria in future.
Rita, tell us briefly how USAID can help or helps protect religiously persecuted minorities who are displaced. And if so, how does USAID partner with local faith-based organizations to help protect vulnerable displaced religious minorities and others, vulnerable people?
Thank you, Nina. Working with faith-based organizations is monumental and very important. We learned from working in the region, in the Middle East region, that faith-based organizations are trusted. They have credible voices with the communities, but need some professional development, which we have been working on, especially in countries like Lebanon. I'm glad to share with you that our recent project, Baladi CAP, we trained 14 different faith-based organizations that ended up benefiting about 2,000 people in providing social services and economic development. We are also working with faith-based organizations in other countries like Morocco, where we are partnering with Jewish cultural heritage sites. We're partnering with the American Sephardic Federation and Association Mimuna to revive cultural heritage sites. Also, definitely in Syria, Egypt, Iraq, our work continues there. Now, in particular, protecting the religious minorities, I want to highlight the work we're doing in Iraq with the Ankawa Humanitarian Committee of the Chaldean Archdiocese of Erbil to strengthen the ability to deliver relief services to internally displaced individuals and to help them by building the capacity of organizational management, tailored skills for supporting the vulnerable populations. So our work is throughout the Middle East and also in the world, and we find great partnership with faith-based organizations.
Okay. Commissioner Bhargava, you visited Burma and even Bangladesh camps to explore and investigate what was happening to the Rohingya Muslim population who were displaced. And what do you want us to know about that?
So I will underscore what you just heard from Weiwei Nu, has been a great partner to USCIRF in really advocating for what's happening to the Rohingya around the world, and particularly those who were driven out of the country in such brutal ways in 2017. We are coming up on the 4th year of there being nearly over 700,000 people who are restricted movement, lack of education, inability to work, and who are sitting in the middle of Bangladesh, and in a time where it is not a refugee resettlement problem, in part because it would be impossible to think about how we could resettle 1 million people, right? And so when we think about that, we have to think about what it is that we need to do to hold Burma accountable for what it is that has taken place. Obviously, there was a military coup in February that we all know about, and that military coup was undertaken by the very groups and individuals who perpetrated the genocide against the Rohingya to begin with. And so, to think about ability to return, and I want to say one thing about that, which is a lot of it has been an argument about who is a citizen of Burma and who has who is part of the polity, and in many ways Burma has that information. It knows who its citizens are, and so the idea that you would ask people who have been driven out of their homes in the middle of the night to evidence the fact that they're part of a country that they had been a part of for generations, they have that information. And it's a question of whether they even acknowledge the existence of people who have lived there for generations. And so it is important that through the Burma Human Rights and Freedom Act, through the continuing push to make sure that there's a genocide determination for the Rohingya, that is something, and that is advocated for and gives some of what we need in terms of underscoring of the importance of the work that's being done in international tribunals to hold Burma accountable and to make sure that we don't buy the idea of a military that has driven people out, suggesting at this point, when they want credibility with the world, that they're going to welcome the Rohingya back. It's not a question of return, it's a question of safe return, and it's a question of return with dignity and the worth and the value that so many that we had a chance to meet with in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh conveyed so gracefully and forcefully to us. And so I think for us, as it is the case with refugees around the world, it is an enormous, as we all know, an enormous crisis in terms of the numbers of refugees we're seeing, and in the places in which we can find ways to hold those who have driven people out accountable. I think that has got to be part of the process, because it is not a situation in which we're going to be able to. I certainly would encourage the United States and other places to welcome the Rohingya, and to the extent that we have, I applaud that. But we certainly need to take other steps to address what's going on there.
Okay, I think we have about 30 seconds left, but Rita, I want to ask you that what does USAID do to prevent refugees and displaced from forming in the first place? You have atrocity prevention programs. Can you just say something very brief about that?
Absolutely. You know, atrocities don't just happen out of the blue. We see things that build up, although towards the end they go quickly. And these things often are unnoticed. While we cannot prevent atrocities, we work with local organizations to kind of mitigate the impact of any effect on minorities. And this is where we found through our work to be very important and very useful, the ability to act quickly and locally.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Which way do we exit?
Once again, Pam Pryor.
Lunch. I promise, soon lunch. You know, every human being is fearfully and wonderfully made. And protecting the least of these, the vulnerable, is a common theme in religious writings. If you want to be part of establishing a global watch group made up of representatives of all faith communities who could report on and respond to religious-inspired violence, then sign up to lead, join, or follow this global campaign. Text "End Violence" to 844-403-2291. It's the same number every time. End violence. Okay? Thank you so much.
Welcome back, Summit Co-Chair Katrina Lantos Sweat.
Well, what a morning it has been. We have been inspired and touched and educated and uplifted. And I have some very exciting news, which is that lunch is just around the corner. So your patience is deeply appreciated, and I hope, although a good meal awaits, I hope that you feel you have been well fed. I want to let you know that breakout sessions, which will be taking place after lunch, will be beginning at 1:45, and at 3:15 we're going to reconvene here for the second plenary. Now, in advance of this fabulous summit, Ambassador Brownback and I were frequently asked, maybe some of you were frequently asked, why religious freedom? Why is it important that we focus on defending religious freedom as opposed to just sort of rolling it into that broader world of human rights causes? I think you have heard some pretty powerful answers to that question today. I hope they are felt deep in your heart, but I'd like to suggest sort of one more thought to take with you, and I'm going to use an analogy to do it. I am not a mathematician. I will never be a mathematician. In fact, it's absolutely the weak link in my intellectual repertoire. But I have enormous admiration for those brilliant minds that can fill multiple blackboards with these immense equations that have symbols and things that I've never even encountered. I will never, ever be able to solve one of those equations, but I know enough of logic and I know enough of reason to understand that if they make a mistake early on one of those blackboards, it doesn't matter how long and how diligently they work on the rest of the equation, the sum will never come right until they go back and fix that problem. To me, respect and defense of freedom of religion, conscience, and belief is sort of the first piece of the human rights equation. It is the foundational piece. And none of the rest of it will ever come right if that piece isn't in place. And that's why it is so important that we fight for this cause. And we are so grateful and so inspired to have you in this fight with us. Religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, all the time. It's our mission, it's our calling, and with your help, we'll bring it to pass. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you back for the second plenary later this afternoon.
This concludes this morning's program. We ask that you promptly leave the ballroom so that staff may clear and reset. This concludes this morning's program. We ask that you promptly leave the ballroom so that staff may clear and reset.